Hey everyone, so on today's episode we're going to be discussing the James Bond series and Doctor Who, looking at why these two properties have lasted 60 years on screen, looking at the similarities, the dissimilarities, and really talking about why they have survived, and so much more coming up on today's episode on the Bond Geek channel. So, as you all pretty much have guessed, I am very much a James Bond fan. James Bond is, without a shadow of a doubt, my fandom. It's the one I connect with the most, the one I cherish the most, the one I really care for the most. But like so many else of you out there, I also have other things I do love. I love Star Wars, I love Lord of the Rings, I love like Marvel and DC, and there's so many other fandoms I am very much proudly a part of. But one of the big ones outside of James Bond, and one I could have easily done a channel on outside of this, is Doctor Who. I have been a massive Doctor Who fan since 2005, where Russell T Davies brought about with Christopher Eccleston. It was around about that same time as well that Daniel Craig got announced to be the next James Bond. And for me, they've almost been in sync to some degree ever since then. Throughout my time on this earth and throughout my conversations with people all across the fandom, I've noticed that actually a lot of Bond fans are also Doctor Who fans, or a lot of Whovians actually really do hold the James Bond series quite highly in their hearts as well. Maybe it's a thing because they both started in the 60s, I don't know, but today we're going to be looking at both of these basically iconic 20th century British icons and ask ourselves, why is it that they have lasted this long? What is it that they do that have made them last so long? What do they have in similarity? What do they not have in similarity? We're going to discuss all this and go into this right now. But before we get into that, everyone, can I please ask that if you haven't already, why not consider subscribing to the channel? Do give us a like, comment down below on your thoughts about it. Without further ado, let's get into the first topic about this video. It's looking at actually some of the actors that appeared in both series. So starting off with, I think, probably the biggest name that has appeared in both James Bond and Doctor Who, it is the great Timothy Dalton. Timothy Dalton, as many of you know, he is without a doubt one of my favourite actors to play James Bond, and I absolutely adore the living daylights. But what he also did in Doctor Who was play one of the Doctor's biggest nemesis, another member of his species, basically a war dictator, a man called Rassilon, and he was absolutely incredible at that. And keeping with some other actors who have been in both properties, you also have famously Julian Glover, one of our best British actors who's basically been in everything. He was obviously Christatos in For Eyes Only, and he played a villain in one of the Tom Baker episodes way back long ago in the 70s. So even after Timothy Dalton, you've also had great names like Geoffrey Palmer, Diana Rigg, Jonathan Pryce, Julian Glover, Hugh Bonneville, and those are some of the big names that appeared in both the properties. And it's really great to see that these really great British icons are getting this high quality of actors. If we just look at the main characters right here and now, they both also share something very similar. They are both, if you will, lone sharks. James Bond is a person who works by himself, a bullet directly into the villains of the world to save the world. He works every now and then with some other people, but he is very much his own self going out into the world. And the Doctor is actually quite similar. The Doctor is a runaway Time Lord, an alien wanting to go and explore the world, be away from his own people, be on his own, hence the lone shark. But he takes a companion along with himself or herself, just so he doesn't or herself go too far. So there is some similarity there about one being this sort of lone person in this vast wilderness, either being the universe or the world. One of the things I really want to elaborate on is I actually feel like they were both products of the 60s. Now, the James Bond film series and Doctor Who started basically nearly, well, a year apart. Doctor No in 1962 and Doctor Who in 1963. Both of them I felt were at a time of a real creative revolution within media. The 60s I felt was a time when they were breaking away from so many of the traditions and trying to be bold and daring and do new things. And both these franchises for me very much so are a part of that movement. If you look at James Bond, it was dark, it was dirty, he was the meanest, toughest hero that the screen probably had ever seen. In Doctor Who, the BBC were doing something very different instead of doing like Dickens and Robin Hood and really venturing more into sci-fi and giving us something completely different and new, and giving us this concept, if you will, of regeneration, the ability to change your main character. I think that's just one of the most important reasons why Doctor Who survived. But also, actually, if you think about it, it's also the reason that James Bond has survived. Both these shows rely on that concept of regeneration and renewal. Now, in Doctor Who, it's done very much more one actor to another actor. And yes, in James Bond, we have transitioned from one actor's era to another actor's era. The same with Doctor Who. But even though it's still playing the same person, they've always done it a little bit differently. I don't think we can deny that Sean Connery's Bond is different than Roger Moore's, and Roger Moore's is different from Brosnan, and Brosnan is different from Lazenby, and Lazenby is different from Craig. All of them, even though they're playing the same character, has given a slightly different variation, again, like Doctor Who. So is this one of the things that makes both these properties last so long? It is their ability for renewal and change. They both also are very well known for their high octane adventure. A lot of people in the Whovian community think of the third Doctor, which was John Pertwee in the early 70s, as, if you will, the James Bond Doctor Who incarnation. And he did slightly want to be an action hero like James Bond when he went into it. So again, there is that connection there of feeding off each other. I also feel that the communities that it creates online, us James Bond community and the Doctor Who community, are so alive and rich and full of great people discussing things, looking over things, having great debates and arguments and reviewing, and so many different voices on so many different like Twitter accounts or Instagram accounts or YouTube channels, all talking with each other and collaborating and do stuff, again, on both sides of this conversation, are all really keeping their properties alive and conscious, which I also think is a contributing factor to why they're both succeeding as long. Another little anecdote that I always very much laugh at is about how even people joke that, yes, we know the Doctor regenerates, but now in the public conscious, it's almost a given that the character James Bond in some ways regenerates. There is a bit of a joke saying, people say, well, Bond regenerated into George Lazenby, then he regenerated back into Sean, then back into Roger, and so on and so on. There are plenty as well of like spoofs and jokes comparing the two all the time, whether it being like fictional art or like sketches. It's always great fun to see these things come together as well, because people do sort of connect these two properties for a reason. The last thing that I really want to talk about when it comes to these properties is why maybe they have lasted so long, is I think they're both now quintessentially British. The James Bond film series is considered, if not definitely, the greatest British film series of all time, and Doctor Who is probably, if not, is definitely the longest running, greatest British television show of all time. And both of them, I think, are really great big icons that the world knows us for. It knows us in England and Britain for James Bond. It knows us for Doctor Who just as much now as like King Arthur and Robin Hood, if not probably even more now with the more mainstream modern audiences. So why is it that even though these properties can be completely dissimilar, you could say, actually both of them have done the same thing that allowed them to longevity? And I think it comes down to two things. The first thing I really want to stress back going again is that concept of regeneration and renewal. Both series have never been afraid to mix things up, change things, bring in a new angle or new perspective on things, and try different things. The other reason I really do feel about is how they've attracted such great talent, because they are now quintessentially modern British icons, right up there with the likes of Sherlock Holmes and King Arthur and Robin Hood. So in summary, I just feel like because of those two reasons, the fact that they can change, regenerate and renew and do different things, and the fact that they've now transcended, both of them, to become British icons in their own right, is the reason for their longevity and why I think they'll continue further and further along. I think you'll find a lot more people who have maybe been in the Bond series might end up in Doctor Who and vice versa. Heck, David Tennant was actually even on a long list for a potential candidate to be James Bond at one point. Both of them were born at a time of great creativity, and I think that's another contributing factor to the reason of their longevity, and long may they reign. But I want to know, everyone, right here, right now, Are you also a fan like me of James Bond and Doctor Who? Do you think there is another similarity that I have missed at all? Do you think there is no similarity, it's just happy coincidence? I want to know. Comment down below and tell me your thoughts on this, because I love to hearing them, and that's the point of these videos, is to start conversations. Well everyone, that's the end of today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you again. Of course, my name's Henry Stevens, and I am the Bond Geek. Goodbye.